Welcome to part 2 of chapter 5 of preschool development, where we will look at cognitive changes. In this section, we will talk about Piaget's preoperational stage, Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, and information processing. So let's begin with Piaget's cognitive development theory and his preoperational stage. This is his second stage of development. Remember, the first stage was the sensory motor stage from birth until 2 years. This second stage runs from 2 to 7 years, and the children move from mainly having a world filled with sensory information and motor skills to one that now involves representing the world mentally. They learn to use words and images and numbers to represent concepts in the world, and they represent things with parts of the world with drawings and with toys in their make-believe play. So the major um, achievement, I guess, is being able to represent concepts from the real world in their mental state. Okay. So they move from forming stable mental concepts at the beginning of this stage to beginning to reason by the end of this stage as they start to begin to move into Piaget's third stage. But for most of this stage, they will not be able to reason logically, but they have the ability to hold mental concepts and to use them to represent the world. Their cognitions are dominated by egocentrism and magical beliefs, which we will talk about shortly. And if you look on Blackboard, you will see I've included a video of Piaget's preoperational stage that I encourage you to watch. We now will define operations because his stage is called the preoperational stage, so it's important that we know what an operation is. I have mentioned it before, but it's worthwhile to mention it again. An operation is some kind of mental, mental logical ability, mental logical activity. A simple example would be adding two numbers, mentally adding two numbers, or subtracting one number from another. You're performing a mental activity in order to, find an answer to a question. So an operation is a mental activity, involving some logical steps. At this age, children, are really incapable of doing anything more than the most simple mental operations. So this is why Piaget referred to them as pre-operational. They're not yet able to perform logic with the mental representations that they can now hold. Right, so they do not yet perform operations. He did split this second stage into two substages, which we will go over. And the first one is called the symbolic function substage from 2 to 4. The second stage will run from 4 to 7 years of age. In this first substage, the child gains the ability to mentally represent an object that's not present. So they can think of something that's not in front of them. That's something perhaps that they had seen the day before. They can carry it and have a representation in their mind, like basically they can like a picture in your head. And we see this come out For instance, when children engage in pretend play, they will pretend one thing is another thing. A child might hold a rectangular block up to their head and pretend it's a phone. Well, this is only possible if you have a mental representation of the phone. Like you have the image in your head, and so you're just using the block as a representational piece to think of it as that phone that you can see in your mind. So this is a there is mental activity going on. It's not logical operations, but children are certainly picturing, and thinking about objects in the world at a mental level. And if you watch children's pretend play, I mean, it's just they're just constantly pretending things that aren't real and that don't exist. They may pretend that certain inanimate objects are alive. They may pretend to be a spy or a doctor, or a mother or father with looking after children. And I mean, it's these things aren't there in front of them, but they're representing them because they have all these mental images that they can rely on. The other way you kind of see it come out is in children's drawings in the preschool years, between 2 and 4. They're basically scribbles, but to the child they are so much more. The child will do some kind of scribble, such as the picture on the left here, and they will claim that this scribble is some kind of great object. Maybe it's an animal. I don't remember what this one's supposed to be, but this is they see like an animal, or I remember one example, a child doing the scribble and saying it was a plate of spaghetti. And anyway, so even though it seems like a scribble to us, to them it represents what they were picturing in their head. Two important limitations exist during this symbolic function substage: egocentrism and animism. I mean, they're referred to as limitations because they kind of stand in the way of logical operational thought. And the first one I'm going to talk about is animism, and this is the belief that inanimate objects have lifelike qualities and that they may be capable of action. So children between 2 and 4, this is fairly common. They might say things like, "Oh, the wind is very mad today because it's very windy out and howling. The sky is sad when the rain comes down." A young child at this age may bump into a piece of furniture or a refrigerator and say sorry when they do it, or they drop one of their toys and then apologize to the toy. Another example is a child saying, "My computer doesn't like me because it keeps eating my pictures." Anyways, these are all examples of animism, that you're giving lifelike qualities to a refrigerator or a piece of furniture or a toy or a computer or the wind or the clouds. I mean, even though they are obviously not alive. So it's kind of a belief, a magical kind of belief that shows up. The second limitation is egocentrism, an inability to distinguish your own perspective from other people's perspectives. And this is very rampant as well between the ages 2 and 4. When Piaget tested for egocentrism, he used what's called the 3 mountains task, pictured here. And these mountains were actually on a table in his lab when he was tested children. And he would have the child, kind of first of all walk around the table of the mountain so that they can see it from different perspectives. Like look at it from here and from here, and then he would have the child look at, stand where it says A on the left. The child would stand or sit there, looking at the mountains, and then Piaget would place a doll at some position around the table, A, B, C, or D, and anyways, then present the child those 4 pictures or photos. One from each side of the table and say, what does it look like from where the doll is standing, or sitting, at this other side of the table. So, if the child's in the B position, then they should pick the B drawing, and anyways, what the children always end up picking is the A drawing, because they pick the one that they can see. It doesn't matter where you put the doll. You can put it at B or C or D. The children invariably pick the A photo, because that is what they can see. And they can't take the perspective of that doll from other points around the table. Some other examples where egocentrism shows up. One that I always find kind of funny is a young preschooler talking on the phone, and so they'll do something like, you're talking on the phone and say, "Hey, Grandma, I've got a new toy," and they hold the toy up in front of their face where they can see it. So they're not describing it to Grandma, they're just holding it up in front of their own eyes, even though they're on the phone with Grandma. Because if they can see it, it's a belief that she can see it as well. And that, we all see things from one perspective. A famous example from Piaget's studies was one of his subjects was a young girl and who had a sister. So he asked this youngster, this young preschooler, do you have a sister? And of course she said yes. And she said, does your sister? He asked him, does your sister have a sister? Oh no, she doesn't have one. So not realizing that she would be her sister's sister, so she couldn't see it from her sister's perspective. So one more example is, and if you watch the video that's on Blackboard, you'll see some examples of this. What do preschoolers do when they hide? Think about it. Think if you've seen preschoolers playing hide and seek or trying to hide on somebody. They cover their eyes. They're horrible at actually hiding. They'll go against a tree in plain view, but put their face into the tree and cover their eyes so that they can't see you. Because they figure if they can't see you, then you can't see them. So they really are bad at hide and seek, because they believe that they just have to make sure that they can't see you. Okay, so that's egocentrism. Animism and egocentrism are, once again, two important limitations at this stage. And during that substage of the symbolic function substage. The second substage of this preoperational period is the intuitive thought substage from 4 to 7. As it says here, children use primitive reasoning and want to know the answers to questions. So they're still pre-operational. They're not doing mental, logical operations, but they are trying to figure out the answers to things. They are, this is kind of a sign of the disequilibrium that I talked about in chapter 3, that, which shows up as children begin to transition to the next stage of thinking. They want to perform operations. They want to figure things out. They want to know the answers to things. They want, so this is a stage where you get the why questions come in between 4 and 7, as children want to know how things work. This signifies an interest. They have an interest in reasoning. They're just not good at it yet. Okay. Limitations. Once again, I'm going to talk about two important limitations in this substage, and they are centration and conservation, a lack of conservation. Sensation is a child centering on one dimension or aspect of a problem and ignoring the others. So an example would, an example would be paying attention to the height of something, but not the width. For instance, they would center on just the height, let's say, of a glass of water, but totally ignore how wide the cup is. And we'll see this in the picture coming up on the next slide. The centration shows up when they try to perform conservation tasks. Conservation is the skill of knowing that the amount, of a substance doesn't change just because its appearance does. The amount or the number of the number of items won't change just because you make them look different. I mean, so the basic properties of an item doesn't change just because you somehow rearrange or make the item look different. And so conservation is understanding that length or number or mass doesn't magically disappear. Here's one of the main tests that Piaget used. It's probably the most famous of the conservation tests. There are a number of them, though, and this one often gets referred to, and it's conservation of liquid. And initially the child is shown two glasses that are exactly the same with the same amount of liquid. Look at the diagram on the top right, the A diagram. They see the A and B glass, and they're asked, is there the same amount of liquid in both? The child will agree. They will look and say, yeah, they'll kind of measure with the finger and say, yeah, there's the same amount in both A and B. So you get them to agree to that. While they're watching you, there's no tricks. You take the B glass, you pour it into the tall C glass, and put the B glass back down, and then you compare A and C, and you ask them, is there more liquid in one or the other glass, or is there the same amount? And as this child's doing, they will pick the taller glass. This is an example of centration while they do the task. This child is centrating or centering on the height of the liquid while ignoring that the width of each glass is different. So he's paying attention to only one aspect of the problem, the height of the liquid. And children throughout the preoperational stage generally do not pass these types of conservation tasks. I'm going to show you a short video now, and you'll see a few different conservation tasks in this video.
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? You think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice? This glass has more juice? Or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more? And why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
So first we're going to look at...
Okay, so you clearly saw that she said that the liquid was taller in the one glass, and so it had more liquid. She centrated on the height of the liquid. This child here, you should notice, is somewhat older. She's a little bit beyond the preschool years. She is going to pass this test. So they included an example of a somewhat older child passing. So go ahead and watch.
At these two cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in this glass as there is in that glass? They're even? Okay. So we're going to take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here. Okay, so now we're going to look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just wider and this one's skinnier, but they have the same amount of juice in it.
Okay, so in that example there, you saw right away she was not fixated just on the height of the liquid. Was talking about one being wider, one being skinnier. she didn't do a great job of explaining her reasoning, but you could see that she wasn't just fixated, as younger children are, on only the height of the liquid. Here we go back to the younger child, and you'll see now a conservation of number task.
Okay, you ready? Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're both the same.
They're the same?
5, 5.
Okay. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
This one has more.
That one has more quarters? Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away.
Yeah, like more far away than that.
Okay, we're gonna play a game with the graham crackers, and we're gonna share them between me and you, okay? Okay. Do you think that we shared those fairly?
No.
No, why not?
Yes, you have done with now.
Well, what if we try this? Okay, can I put this on right there? Now is it fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, why is it fair now?
Because we both have 2.
Can you look at these 2 glasses? Do you think that they have?
Okay, and that's the end of the video. So you can see at the end there another conservation of number task with the graham crackers. By the way, that totally works. If a preschooler ever complains that they don't have the same as somebody else, just break it into the right number of pieces, and they'll be happy. It doesn't matter if they're smaller, because they can't take that into account. They're just centrating on the number. And you saw that young child during the coin task, she centrated on the length. The coins were farther apart, making them longer, as she expressed. This is why she thought there was more. So in all of these tasks, conservation tasks, the child centrates on one aspect or dimension of the problem. So you just see a few of them once again here. We saw the number task in that video with the coins. There's also one called conservation of matter, where you use clay. Start off with 2 identical balls of clay. The child agrees that they're the same amount of clay, and then you mash one down, or you roll it up into like a snake figure, or you just push it down flat so it looks different. And then they pick one or the other as having more clay. And once again, you always do these things in front of them. So there's no way that clay could be added or disappear, but they can't use that kind of logic yet. This last one kind of blows my mind, the conservation of length. You show 2 sticks lined up. They agree that they're the same length, and then you just nudge one over. That's all you do. There's once again, no trickery. You just nudge it over a little bit. Are they the same length now? Nope. One of them or the other is longer all of a sudden. So we see the failures of these conservation tasks amongst preschoolers. And by the way, it's not 100%. There are some preschoolers that will pass some of these, depending on their experience in the world and whether they're advanced or things like that. But by and large, preschoolers fail, and in elementary school, children will tend to pass these. Okay, so that's Piaget's preoperational level from 2 to 7. Not yet logical, but they do have a lot of mental activity and representations going on, and a number of limitations that Piaget concentrated on. We saw some of them there. The second cognitive theory we're going to look at is Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. In Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, or what's called the social constructivist approach here. And by the way, it is formally known as the sociocultural theory. I don't have it on the slide here, but children, according to Vygotsky, children learn through social interaction, and this is how they advance their thinking. That's the primary method of advancing your cognition, learning from others. Nowhere in Piaget's theory does he talk about learning from others. He did not think that direct instruction was very important at all. He felt that children learn from the environment, from just doing things and handling objects and playing with things. And Vygotsky believed in direct instruction, believed in learning from your, more intelligent peers and from your elders and whatnot. A couple of the important concepts in his theory are zone of proximal development and scaffolding. I'm going to start with scaffolding. It is changing the level of support that you offer a child as they progress in learning a new skill. So as an example, suppose over the course of months or years, I might be doing puzzles with my young preschool daughter. And at first, the first time she ever does puzzles, she basically can't do anything. She doesn't know how to do it when she's just at, a couple of years of age. And you basically, as a parent, you end up doing it for them. You say things like, "Where does this go?" And they kind of point somewhere, but you put the piece in for them. You help them. You help turn it the right way, and they can't do much at the start. As they progress and get better and more experienced at puzzle doing, and their cognition's advancing over time, they get, you start withdrawing your support. So whereas you used to do most of it yourself, now they can choose where some of the pieces go. They're not always good with their little clumsy fingers and putting the pieces in right, but sometimes you have to help them turn it and push it in. So you're still offering support when they need it, but it's less than what you used to do. And as time goes on, you'll offer even less support. Eventually, they'll just need help with some of the harder pieces, but they'll be doing a lot of them on their own. And probably by the end of it all, at the end of some months or years of puzzle activities, you'll be the one watching. It started with them watching you do it. Now you're watching as they do the whole thing on their own, and you're just offering support and encouragement. So scaffolding it's called scaffolding. You can think of a series of scaffolds, like a series of levels, and originally you give a lot of support, and you remove one level of support at a time. You do a little bit less and a little bit less for them, and they have to do more on their own. And okay, that's scaffolding. And scaffolding is going to help advance a child through what's called their zone of proximal development. So the zone of proximal development is a range of tasks too difficult for the child to do alone, but they can be learned and accomplished with guidance from a more knowledgeable parent, caregiver, or peer. I'm going to go to the next page as I continue to talk about this zone of proximal development. So when you think of this zone, there's a lower and an upper limit. So once again, this zone is things that the child can do with support, with help from another. So the lower limit, at the very bottom of this zone, are things that the child can do on their own, things that they've already mastered. So for instance, there may be a child that's a preschooler that consistently can count to 10 every time they want. They've nailed counting to 10. When they go on, they sometimes get some of the numbers wrong between 10 and 20, and sometimes they forget. If they try to keep going past 20, they forget what the word 30 when they get to it. And anyways, they have problems continuing, but they can get to 10 every day of the week. So that would be at their lower limit. They can do that on their own. So above counting to 10, counting to higher numbers, they would need help with. And so that counting to a higher number would be in their zone. The upper limit to this zone is is, is where you reach a level where the child cannot do that skill even with help. So that child that's learned to count to 10, I mean, above the upper limit would be things like algebra and calculus. I mean, they just learn to count to 10. They're no matter how much you help that preschooler, they're not going to be able to do a calculus problem or an algebra problem, obviously. I mean, I'm just making it obvious. I'm jumping way ahead, but I mean, above the upper limit are things that they can't do no matter how much help you give them. So everything in between, within the limit, are all the tasks they can do with guidance and support and help. And this zone is so important because this is where a child's cognition advances. When you work with the child within their zone of proximal development, then their lower limit, moves upwards. That child that could count to 10, you keep helping them. Now they can always get to 20 on their own. So that lower limit moves upwards. And now you're going to, and you're also scaffolding, remember? So like now you don't need to help them with those numbers between 10 and 20 anymore. They can do those on their own. And so you help them with more advanced numbers and remembering, the names of each tens group, 30, 40, 50, and things like that when they get to those. And so the zone moves upwards as you scaffold, you give less help as the child solves more on their own, and you keep working with the child in their zone, adjusting it as they get better at a task. Okay. Let me go on. Okay, so that's zone of proximal development. And it's important to consider, like I've always pointed out, that it's individual for each child. Even if you have a classroom of children, it's important to understand each individual child's zone of proximal development. You can't just assume, well, everyone at this level of education can do this skill, but they can't do this one yet. I mean, it's going to vary. Obviously, each child has different skills. Each child has a different lower level and a different upper level for any skill set that they're trying to master. Okay. The final kind of important concept in Vygotsky's theory is the importance of language. So obviously, I always said that he's a believer that we learn through interactions with the others, and to interact and learn from another, language is obviously primarily of primary importance. So children use speech, as it says here, to communicate socially and to help them solve tasks. Vygotsky believed language was incredibly important to advance your cognition. He noticed, both Piaget and Vygotsky noticed, that children in the preschool years often talk to themselves. Vygotsky labeled this private speech. And he said, and quite correctly actually, he said that he believed that the children use private speech for self-regulation. For at least one of the purposes is for self-regulation, to regulate their own behaviors. So for instance, think about a young child, preschooler, and they're in the preschoolers at grandma's house, and there's some, little glass figurines or knickknacks on some of the tables, and they've been told before, don't touch those, they're really delicate, don't touch them. And if that, as a preschooler goes over to look at these little figurines, you might hear them just saying to themselves, don't touch, don't touch. I mean, and this is them regulating the behavior. They're talking out loud to themselves. And that's what Vygotsky labeled as private speech. It's for themselves. However, I will say that actually before I move on out, so I said that they use it for self-regulation. They also use it to plan, to guide themselves, to monitor their own behavior. So it's not just regulating, like controlling the behavior. If they're doing a task, they may repeat the steps out loud. Okay, I should do this now. Okay, now I gotta put this block over here to make the doorway. And so they might be building a castle or something, and you might hear them talk to themselves out loud of the steps that they need to do. And so they do self-regulation, control of the behavior, but they also guide themselves through tasks, and it's been noticed that more difficult tasks, children talk to themselves more out loud, preschoolers. So it is useful to them. Anyway, so Vygotsky felt that private speech was very useful, and I mentioned at the start that Piaget also noticed that children talk to themselves. However, Piaget had a different viewpoint. He just believed that this speaking out loud to themselves was another sign of egocentrism, and that he said it was just an immature behavior that they would grow out of. So Piaget kind of saw it as a weakness, that it was just another limitation that children went through as part of their egocentrism, that they believed that as they talked to themselves that, everyone could hear them because they could hear themselves. Well, it turns out that certainly Vygotsky was more correct on this point, and that the private speech actually wasn't just a weakness. It was, as I said, very useful for children. A number of studies have shown this. This private speech eventually becomes inner speech, and at some point the child will, instead of talking out loud, will talk to themselves inside their head. And then Vygotsky said this inner speech eventually just becomes thinking, becomes thoughts. And so they're moving from speaking out loud to speaking in their head to just thinking, thoughts. And so he believed that this language, this private speech, was kind of a doorway to improving their thinking abilities. It's been showing in studies, it has been shown in studies that children that use more private speech in these preschool years tend to have more social competence. They're actually improving in their social abilities by talking to themselves as they play and do tasks. Okay. I'm not going to go through this evaluation. I'll just look at this first point. So Vygotsky's approach is known as a social constructivist approach. You're constructing knowledge through social interactions, and so knowledge is built up or constructed as you interact with others. Okay, this is a comparison you can see in your book on page 153. Nice comparison between Vygotsky and Piaget's theories on a number of different dimensions. I'm just going to mention one of them, and that is the role of language. I've already spoke about how important Vygotsky thought it was. He thought that language plays a powerful role, as it says here, in shaping our thoughts. So he believed that the language led to cognitive advancement. Your language is as I said earlier, it's kind of like a gateway to advancing your thinking abilities. Piaget, completely opposite ordering of these two things. He didn't believe language was important for your cognition. Rather, it was kind of a side effect of your cognitive improvements. So your cognitive advancement directs your language advancement. So improving your thinking improves your language. Vygotsky said improving, the more language you use, it improves your thinking. So Vygotsky went from language affecting thinking. Piaget went from thinking affects your language abilities. Okay. You can read the rest of the similarities and differences in the text and by looking at this chart in your book. The third theory in this cognitive section is the information processing theory. And I'm going to focus on a number of specific aspects of information processing. I don't know how much I've talked about information processing in general so far in the first unit, but information processing is a very large theory. It's a large subset of different processes, because if you think about manipulating information, I mean, it encompasses so many different skills. Some of the things that get studied in information processing are memory, which is storing information. You study sensation and perception in information processing, because that's about getting information into the brain and making sense of it. You study decision making, which is, you know, using information. Problem solving is using information. I mean, language is an aspect of communicating information. So like all of these areas are part of information processing. It's not just like one small theory. It's you know, so many areas. Attention is where we're going to start today. Attention is how you get information, is one of the ways you get information into the brain. You have to pay attention to something in order to encode that information and to get it, once again, to have the information be transferred into your mental life. So we will begin with attention. There are two major advances in attention during the preschool years. The first one is in executive attention. And their abilities improve significantly during the preschool years. Executive attention just is kind of like control of attention. When you see the word executive, it's kind of like the control center for attention. And so, you know, you plan your actions, you allocate a certain amount of attention to each goal, you detect errors as you do a task, you change your method of let's say you're studying for a test, you might change your method at some point if you notice you're running out of time, and anyways, you monitor your progress, how much more do I need to get through before I'm ready for the test. And anyway, so it's dealing with difficult circumstances, might be trying to study when there's distracting stimuli in the environment, maybe loud noises or something. So it's about controlling your attention and manipulating and shifting it. That's executive attention. The second, so that's one thing that really improves during the preschool years. Preschoolers get better at controlling their attention. The second thing is called sustained attention. Preschoolers get much better at holding their attention on one task. Oh, excuse me. So focusing their attention on one task for a length of time is sustained attention. And they say that the greatest increase in sustained attention is during this early childhood period versus any other time period in development. The most advances or strides are made during the early childhood. And once again, think about a 3-year-old. Remember, I told you that they're fidgety, they're rambunctious, they have trouble sitting still. Their sustained attention is horrible, a 3-year-old. Whereas a 6-year-old, you know, at the end of the stage, I mean, they can sit in a classroom already and pay attention to a teacher for long periods and do, you know, one task for a long period. I mean, it's very, very different attention levels between a 6 and a 3-year-old as far as holding their attention to one task. By the way, one other name for sustained attention is vigilance. So if you see that term, being vigilant just means holding your attention on something. There are also certainly deficiencies in attention that show up amongst preschoolers, and I'm going to talk about a couple of them here. The first is being able to pay attention to relevant versus salient dimensions. And preschoolers are easily distracted by what we call the salient dimensions of a problem. I mean, maybe not the most important, relevant aspects of something that they're learning, but they pay attention to the colorful or the noisy or the interesting aspects of a problem, not necessarily knowing how to specifically focus on the most important aspects. So to give you an example, suppose a clown comes into their classroom and they've been told to listen to the directions the clown gives you. He's going to tell you how to, I don't know, how to solve a math problem or something like that. Anyways, he's going to give you specific directions. Make sure you listen to him. And children in the preschool years are distracted by the fact that he's a clown, and they're looking at his colorful nose and his colorful clothes and his hair and you know, any clown noises he makes. And even though the clown is giving relevant information, children have trouble paying attention to those relevant aspects of the problem. They are distracted by the salient. So salient just means what stands out. The salient aspects is what stands out. So that is one deficiency, is being able to pick out what's relevant. The second one I want to mention is planfulness, and preschoolers lack the ability to make logical plans. Remember, they are in Piaget's preoperational stage, which means that they can engage in logical thought. So when they try to make they do not make logical plans when they do some type of task. An example is you can see these pictures here. One type of task they give to children and is they'll give them two pictures, side by side, like the two pictures in A or the two in B, and they have the child has to determine whether the pictures are the same or different. And in order to do this task, you have to kind of go window by window. So you look at the top left window in one and the top left window in the other. And so you can't just kind of, and you should do it systematically. Okay, I'm going to do the highest windows, and then the middle windows, and then the lowest windows. Like, you should have a system in place. Preschoolers do not. They just kind of compare randomly. Oh, I'm going to look at this window versus this one, and it's not always the same windows matching up that they're comparing it. And so they will often miss, windows a single window that might be different. When we compare this to older children in school age, past the age of 5 or 6, I mean, they're much better. And so it does improve as children leave the preschool years, but they are not very planful as preschoolers. So don't expect, when you give a preschooler, let's say, a set of directions, I want you to do this today and then do this, and after you do the dishes, you do your, I don't know, you have to do this other chore. And like, if you give them some kind of complex set of directions like that, to make a kind of a plan of action, you can't. They're not good at it. You should not expect them to be able to follow through, whereas an older child would be able to. Okay. So that's attention. The next aspect of information processing I'm going to talk about is memory. And memory obviously means the retention of information over time. Remember, we have 3 major memory systems. We have what's called a sensory memory, which holds information in its raw form for 1 to 2 seconds. So, if I close my eyes, I still have a picture of everything I just saw in my brain for up to about 1 more second. Anyways, so we have a sensory memory. Whatever I pay attention to is going to get transferred to my short-term working memory. There I can hold information for up to about 30 seconds without rehearsing it. 30 seconds is really the maximum. You can think of your short-term working memory as kind of like your consciousness, whatever's in your mind right now, whatever you're thinking about. And then the third memory system is the long-term memory system. And if we engage in meaningful elaboration and thought of what's in our short-term working memory, we can transfer it to our long-term memory for long-term storage. It won't go automatically if you just kind of, let's say, just look at the words on this page without thinking about them. They won't go into long-term memory. But if you start thinking about, oh, okay, I'm thinking about how long I can hold information in my short-term, and you actually elaborate on the information that you're reading and that you're hearing from me by doing some elaborative thinking, you transfer that information. It forms a long-term memory trace in your long-term memory. Okay, we often we do tests of the short-term working memory in children by having them engage in what's called a memory span task to assess their short-term memory. Certainly, memory span varies from one individual to another, particularly children of different ages. So it's not set in stone. It is a developing. Your memory span is something that develops along with your age. As you develop your memory, you get a larger and larger memory span throughout your developmental years. we can see this from in this chart here, and this is based on a digit span task where you're giving a certain number of digits to remember. And so, it would start with, a single digit, okay, remember the number 9. Okay, what number did I tell you? And you say 9. And then I give you the number, okay, you have to remember 3 and 6. And then you have to repeat back to me 3 and 6. And then eventually I'm giving you like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you see how many digits can you accurately recall and repeat back. And that is your digit span. So based on this task, you can see I'm gonna give you like the numbers from this chart, from this graph, kind of in chart form. I'm not actually typing it out, so just make a little chart for yourself if you want to record the information. One heading can be span. I'm going to give you the number of digits in the span, and the second heading is age. At what age do they have that? So, and this really comes from this chart. So you have a 2-digit span at the age of 2. So 2-year-old, this means a 2-year-old can only hold two separate pieces of information in their head at one time, in their conscious thought. So of course they can't do something like add 2 numbers, because you would need a third position for the answer. I mean, like, it limits, what kind of cognitive thinking you can do when you have a shorter memory span. Okay, it's up to 3 at the age of 3. It goes up to a span of 4 at the age of 4. You get up to 5 digits, remember 5 digits at the age of 7. You can remember 6 digits at the age of 9. And then you get up to basically, you get up to around 6.5 digits on average at the age of 13. So you're somewhere between 6 and 7 digits. So it's at 6.5. And then by the time you get to adulthood, you're up to, on average, 7 digits. And you probably heard that before in Psych 101, that the average short-term memory span is 7 items that an adult can hold, plus or minus 2. So it tends to range between 5 to 9 items amongst adults. So anyways, that's the basic kind of developmental trajectory that, it takes a while. So preschoolers at 2, 3, 4 years of age are only holding 2, 3, 4 items in their short-term memory. This limits their cognitive abilities. This is why they're preoperational in Piaget's theory. And this is the way information processing explains it, that you need your memory span to increase as you develop, in order to increase your cognitive thinking abilities. Okay. How accurate are long-term memories? I guess I'm not going to go through all of this. I will mention that preschoolers are the most suggestible age group. The most open to suggestion. It's not hard to implant, misinformation or implant memories, really into a preschooler's mind. If you get them, for instance, to think about something over and over, eventually they'll believe it really happened. And they've done experiments like this where they've children imagine, for instance, that there was one where they showed them pictures of a hot air balloon, and they had actually superimposed the child's picture into the hot air balloon, and said, oh, you think about when you were up in a hot air balloon, and here you are with your uncle in a hot air balloon. And just by showing them a picture and having them think about it, these children end up believing, yes, I really took a hot air balloon trip. And anyway, so there are ways, just by how you suggest things, and if you have children to imagine things, that you can implant memories. I mean, don't go ahead and do that all with preschoolers. It's kind of unethical to do it purposely, but the reason they study it, of course, is to determine, can preschoolers hold up as witnesses in trials and court cases? Can they provide accurate testimony? And the answer is that, they really can't, unless you use the most the most advanced like interviewing techniques, and you can't have police question preschoolers because they will ask the wrong kind of questions that can implant memories and thoughts. You need a highly trained developmental psychologist that's trained in this area to ask questions appropriately in order to get true information about a preschooler's memory. Because once again, just suggesting something. If you ask a preschooler, do you remember when Johnny kicked Fred in the knee, and just by asking that question, like that may have never happened, but by asking that question, this child may end up forming a memory that Johnny kicked Fred in the knee just because you asked him that once. So this is the way preschoolers' memories work. And so anyways, it's an interesting area. Read more about it in the book. I just want to point it out. Preschoolers are very suggestible, so they do not make good eyewitness testimony witnesses. Autobiographical memory improves, certainly improves during the preschool years. Autobiographical memory just refers to memory for your own life and the events in your own life, things that you've been involved with. So remembering a trip to the zoo, for instance. Anyway, it certainly improves during the preschool years. That's all I'm going to say. Let's go on. Okay. The last thing I think I'm really going to talk about in this section is on this slide. First of all, executive functioning. I already talked about executive attention earlier, which was kind of control of attention. Executive, when you see this term executive functioning, it refers to, as it says here, higher level cognitive processes linked to the development of the brain's prefrontal cortex. Your executive function center is in your prefrontal cortex. It is your control center for your brain. It is controlling your thinking, controlling your impulses, controlling your decision-making process. It's also where even your executive attention comes from. So it's controlling your own thoughts, controlling your own impulses, your own behaviors. And one way they study this is with the marshmallow experiment. They study what's called delay of gratification. Can a preschooler withhold their impulse to eat a marshmallow in order to get a reward later? And the way it works is they give a child a single marshmallow, and they are promised a second marshmallow if they can go without eating the first one. And they leave them alone with the marshmallow in front of them in a kind of usually a bare room where there's no distracting toys or anything like that around. And so they just usually end up staring at the marshmallow as this child is. The ones that can withhold their impulse to eat it in order to have two marshmallows later, it's been shown that they tend to do much better in school. It is a very important skill to be able to control your impulses and regulate your own behavior like this. So as it says at the bottom here, it's linked to success in life. The children that pass this marshmallow test. Okay. Theory of mind, I'm going to skip. I want you to read it on your own. It's a little bit complex, but take your time and read it in the book. And this false belief performance has to do with theory of mind. So it's some results from a study they did have to do with theory of mind. Do read about it on your own. And that concludes the second portion of chapter 5. We have one more video where we will talk about language development, and then we will talk about preschool or early education, early childhood education. Okay. I'll see you in video 3 coming up shortly.